So I want to talk about tax court. What is tax court? How do you end up there? And what do you do when you get there? And how do you get there? So tax court is basically the court that has original jurisdiction over IRS matters, both in examination and the collection division, to a much lesser extent in the collection division. So the examination division, what is that? Well, the examination division is the division of the IRS that attempts to determine how much tax you owe. So think of it as the audit examiner or the audit division. So how do you end up in tax court? Well, your typical way to end up in tax court is you're going through an audit and your auditor and you just can't seem to agree. So the auditor wants to disallow a bunch of stuff and you as a taxpayer just don't think it's right, and that's real common. So what will happen is eventually the auditor will run out of time, or will start to run out of time on what's called the assessment statute of limitations. In a nutshell, they have 3 years, sometimes 6 years, and sometimes unlimited. But basically, you can think of it as they have 3 years from the due date of the return or the late filing of the return if it was late filed to assess additional tax. And oftentimes, if the auditor doesn't have at least a year left on the assessment statute, they're going to ask you to sign something called a Form 870 to give them more time. They usually want at least 1 year left on the assessment statute. And if you refuse to do that, what they're going to do is they're going to issue something called a notice of deficiency. A notice of deficiency is sometimes called a 90-day letter, and that's because it gives you 90 days to file a petition with the tax court. And a petition is kind of like a complaint in any other kind of civil case. It's your ticket into court. It's your ticket to get the court to review what you think the IRS is proposing to do that you disagree with. And that notice of deficiency comes out, and it's actually a letter 3219. Sometimes it's a CP 3219A. And they look a little bit different, which was a little bit hard on us who've been doing this for a long time, because the notice of deficiency, the 3219, has a real distinct look about it. It has a date in red on the top, and it has a last date of file, which is the 90th day, in red as well. And then when this letter CP 3219A came out, it looks different. And so I don't know how many got by where tax pros didn't tell their clients that, that they had the right to file a tax court petition, but I'm sure some did, because it just really looks a whole lot different. But at any rate, you file your tax court petition, and you have really two choices. You can do the traditional filing. I think it's called the long form, and it's really, you have to get it formatted correctly and whatnot. Or there's also something called a small case petition. A small case petition is by definition a case that has less than $50,000 in controversy. And that brings me back to my point about the collection division. When do you have tax court rights in a collection case? So in a collection case, it's kind of case where you're not arguing about how much do you owe, really. You're arguing about, well, how am I going to afford to pay this? Well, the answer is you can file a tax court petition if you had filed a timely filed request for collection due process hearing, and you got an adverse decision from IRS appeals that you disagree with, and then you can go ahead and file a tax court petition. But the standard's pretty high. The standard of review is actually you have to prove that there was an abuse of discretion on the part of the IRS settlement officer, which can be quite a hurdle. So let's talk about what happens after you're in tax court. You file your tax court petition, and you send in your $60, which is your filing fee, and then what happens? Well, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get a shot to speak to somebody at IRS Appeals. In this context, IRS Appeals is there to help the IRS counsel settle cases. IRS counsel, I don't know exactly how many, but IRS counsel has hundreds of cases at any given time in their open inventory. And on any given trial week in tax court, the tax court's going to have hundreds of cases set too. So there's a lot of pressure both by the tax court judge as well as IRS counsel to get these cases satisfied and settled. So you're going to have a shot to talk to somebody at the IRS Appeals Division about your case. And a lot of times they do sort of like the Solomon thing. They cut the baby in half. You're not real happy, but it's not as bad as the auditor proposed, and so it kind of works out like that. The next thing that happens is if you can't get it settled with IRS Appeals, probably a month or so before your trial date, which is going to be set off quite some time in most jurisdictions. It could be set off for a year. It could be set off for 2 years. But at some point, several weeks before trial, IRS counsel is probably going to give you a call. And they're going to want to know, are we going to try this case? And if we're going to try this case, what are the issues? and they're going to ask you for stipulations and stuff like that. But the point that I'm bringing up, or the reason I'm bringing this up, is because there's going to be an opportunity, most likely, to go ahead and settle it with IRS counsel also. So that's what tax court is. You can also, when you get a letter 3219 or a CP 3219A, you're also going to get a form 5564, which is a waiver of your right to file a tax court petition. You certainly have the right to sign that waiver, and the tax will be assessed quicker. I can't think of very many reasons why you would want to sign that waiver, but I'm sure there are some. If you have questions about this or really anything else that has to do with tax problems, please give me a call at 888-438-6474 or visit my website at getirshelpnow.com.